Thank you for staying tuned. Now, despite the current global energy transition to net zero carbon emission, there seems to be abundance of opportunities yet to be harnessed in Nigeria's oil and gas sector, as the country is blessed with enormous proven and unproven gas reserves with an increasing crude production output. With the declaration of Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu as president-elect of Nigeria, there are high expectations that the new administration will drive the exploitation of these opportunities by addressing key issues that will facilitate growth, stability, and sustainability in Nigeria's oil and gas industry by collaborating with stakeholders to enhance the gains of the recent reforms in the industry and ensuring a shift in the regulatory landscape. Let's get more insight into this and, of course, prospects and challenges of this very important sector. I'm being joined via Zoom by an energy lawyer and analyst, Dr. Ayodele Oni. Dr. Oni, thank you for your time. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Doc, a lot to talk about. Earlier, I stayed with the economy, and Dr. Yusuf was almost talking about shifting to his focus to the oil and gas industry, talking about the framework and all of that is being worked on with regards to growing that sector. From the GDP figures that we have last week, we see that the oil and gas sector is not doing as well as it used to do, talking about contribution to that sector. Give us an overview of what you think is playing out in Nigeria's oil and gas space and what should be the focus of the incoming administration to revamp, reorganize, whatever needs to be done to attract the needed investment to that space.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I'll start by saying that we do seem to see some progress around upstream, around production. We seem to see an increase in production, and we seem to see that the government made a lot of effort to ensure that production does improve. Where we do have a lot of challenge is around the midstream and availability of petroleum products in Nigeria. The challenge is that if we do export and then we need to spend a lot of money to bring in finished products, then we will be at a deficit. It ultimately affects us. You can have a lot of base crude, produce a lot, but if you not refine sufficiently, then you will continue to have the challenges we will have around contribution to your GDP and all of that, and even your balance of trade and payment. A number of these challenges have been around infrastructure. A number of that has been around, of course, the refineries, producing not optimally, issues around not completely deregulating your midstream, even critical gas infrastructure have been a challenge. You know, all of these gas and oil infrastructure have been a challenge. As long as we don't deal with these issues, we will continue to seem to motion without move. We will make motions, but we would not actually move. So I think these are some of the challenges. And interestingly, you'd find out that from the manifesto of BAT, the winner of that election, some of these issues have been addressed, from crude oil, from increasing our production, to issues around gas. I'll leave it at that for now.
Interesting stuff. Increasing production is key at this time. Just like you said, the last figures we saw about 1.3, round about that, looking better than when we were doing less than 1 million. Let's talk about these reforms. And one of it is the Petroleum Industry Act, which many believe that act should open up that sector. But I don't know, maybe for me, I would say it's like we are not getting as much as expected from this. What is your take with regards to the reforms in the sector? What better deals do we have if we are to look away from this?
Okay, first thing you've got to appreciate is that there's a lot of competition now. Competition from other sources of hydrocarbons and competition from countries, from everyone speaking around clean energy, net zero, decarbonization. So the pressure is a lot. So you need to be very, very competitive, and you need to think outside the box. Now, the PIA is a really brilliant idea, but it does appear that it did come a bit too late. That said, we can still make the most of it. There are a number of issues even the PIA still does need to address. One of them is, for example, the backing rights regulations, where the government can back in 50% into an asset. So you need to ensure that we need to relook, the new administration needs to look at the PIA again. That's one thing that needs to be done. And issues around our midstream still need to be looked at. It's not about policies alone. We do seem to have very strong policies. It's about implementation. You want to be sure that you do not only have good policies, but you have the right people to implement these policies. And it cuts across the energy value chain from oil and gas to even electricity. We have policies. We have the Siemens deal, for example, to improve the operational situation around generation and transmission and distribution to an extent. You need to ensure that you have people who will implement beyond policy. I dare say Nigeria has some of the brightest. It's sufficient to be able to look at what they are doing elsewhere with respect to energy transition and to be able to forge our own policies, have a West African policy and strategy, have an African strategy, and see how we can do more with Europe for our oil and for our crude oil and for our gas, and even locally. Remove subsidy at some point. Of course, I think there should be a strategy to that, and I think it shouldn't be removed at once. And then let people come and compete in the midstream. Let people find other sources of getting white products and selling same competitively. If we don't do all of these and integrate the eastern and western, the northern and the southern, generally speaking, pipeline system, which is part of what we will see with the AKK, with OBEN 3 and a number of this infrastructural development we see with this current administration. So we need to work across the value chain from generation in the power sector to distribution, and from production in oil and gas from upstream to downstream in the oil and gas sector. I think we've got our work cut out. There's a lot that needs to be done. We need to link the eastern, western, and northern gas pipeline, for example, too. And I think that projects around that have started already.
Let's speak around
energy
finance now. How do we finance all of this? Because many will tell you that anything that has to do with the oil and gas industry, of course, you will agree with me, that is capital intensive. So what are you thinking about finance, particularly at this time where we're even looking at transition?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Something I've seen more recently is forward sale arrangements. You'd enter into some form of arrangement where people know they will be taking your oil and gas, maybe at a reasonable discount, but they provide the financing for you to develop those assets today. So you have money to use today for assets they will get in the future. And you'd have economists and you'd have financial people working around the numbers, ensuring that you get a discount for that. That's one thing. Another thing I think we can do in this part of the world is to latch on the challenge with the Russia-Ukraine war. Europe is Russia, prior to this time, provided 40% of the gas used in Europe. If we can, and it then means that there are opportunities for us to speak to European nations to support us in improving our gas infrastructure. Of course, we will have to make some compromises. That's another way we can raise financing. And of course, government does need to plug leakages. I think there's a lot of leakage in the system. If we can plug some of the leakages, we would have some more money to be able to add value to what we're already doing. Work more closely with the private sector. I've thought about some of these ideas government has put forward are very brilliant. For example, the idea of having companies build infrastructure like roads and they can net off from their tax. If you sit down and continue to come up with policies that investors find attractive, then you'll be able to raise more financing. From a tax perspective, there's so many things you can do to ensure that you make it attractive. You can continue to have tax holidays. You do quite a number. So as you continue a number of those incentives, as you continue to encourage people to come into the country, private sector will drive some of these. But of course, with respect to infrastructure backbone, I always think it's the government's responsibility to develop the infrastructure backbone. And then you would have the private sector tee off that infrastructure backbone that the government does develop. So I think we have smart people who can rationalize some of these and who can put forward policies and incentives to attract international players who would then bring in the financing. You just also need to be sure that there's certainty of your legal and regulatory regime, because certainty is always a problem. If you are not certain as to what the legal and regulatory regime is, you're likely to want to come and invest.
Let's wrap up this interview talking about gas commercialization. I'm interested in all of this talk around gas because we are yet to harness all that we have with regards to that resource. Where do we start from? Infrastructure, building that gas infrastructure that is needed. There are some monies that ought to come from the central bank at the time. I think it was also what to be allocated for this process, when many say it's not it's not enough. Now, what do you think about that process, and what are the quick wins in this gas, taking advantage of our gas reserves?
Okay, the first thing which has been done is the legal regime, the PIA. Prior to now, you had pieces of regulations here and there issued by the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. You had the domestic supply regulations, where and you had the gas master plan dealing with infrastructure, dealing with a domestic supply obligation, amongst others. With the PIA, there's a more certain regime. Now, what we need to do, government has done that with respect to policy, is just to ensure that there's consistency. Government continues to go on with its projects like the OBN 3, the Trans-Nigeria Gas Pipeline, the AKK, to support the virtual pipeline arrangement. We already have a number of companies, and I don't intend to advertise here, who are already supplying gas to the industry. So the challenge with gas, I think government is doing quite a bit, and we will make a lot of progress. The challenge with gas is historical. Historically, there was insufficient demand, and there was poor commercial arrangement, such that you will spend $1 on infrastructure, and government would force you to sell at 50% that price. So no one wanted to invest. So for a long time, there wasn't investment in gas infrastructure. But very recently, we see a lot of investment coming in from the government, like the AKK. We see a lot of investment. We see a lot of companies, a lot of new players doing particularly virtual pipeline, where they do CNG and use trucks to move those. So government's push to have industrialization will also push gas. So I don't think much more needs to be done in terms of policy. I think it's implementation. I'll also give you an idea. There's a gas flare commercialization program currently going on. So we were one of the highest, Nigeria has remained one of the highest gas flaring countries. But with the gas flare commercialization program, companies are now allowed to come and take gas at the flare point and use the gas for midstream gas projects, So as long as we continue to have projects, industrialization being pushed, you continue to need gas, whether it's for as feedstock or for power generation, for fertilizer, for methanol, for whatever it is. So government just needs to ensure that the overall economy improves, more industrialization is encouraged, issues around taxation, maybe increase the tax net. Some will argue that we are amongst the most taxed countries in the world in terms of informal taxation. So I think from a policy point of view, we're on our way. It's implementation. Many of our challenges are around implementation. That's why you hear people say the devil is in the detail, and it's in the detail of implementation. So I think this government has done a lot with respect to upstream and midstream, the PIA. We just need to ensure that the incoming government gets the right people to continue to implement some of these things, and to ensure that no one lags behind in terms of what they should do. I think we're on our way, and I think a lot of progress has been made. We just need to continue to do more and have more incentives to encourage people. And government should not only have laws, but should be seen to implement those laws, those regulations, and those incentives. And I think we'll make success of what we currently have.
Well, this will be a running discussion. We'll continue to set this agenda across all sectors, and definitely, Dr. Ayodele Oni, you'll be joining us again to speak around this. Thank you so much, energy lawyer and analyst for your time on the show. We appreciate your contribution.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, there. Well,
Enjoy
it's time to talk markets. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Oni. There, enjoy your day too. Let's